Hey, what's up, guys? So, I want to talk about the question of whether or not the Jewish people thought that they earned their election into the covenant. I'm talking about Jewish people at the time of the Apostle Paul, because that's relevant for questions of Pauline studies, Pauline exegesis, the whole debate about the quote unquote new perspective on Paul. What is Paul talking about when he talks about works of law? Is he attacking good works, earning salvation, etc., etc.? I'm not going to do an intro to that topic. I do have other videos on that. You could leave a comment if you want more info under the video. But so on that question, did the Jewish people think they earned their election into the covenant? Everyone says no, no, they didn't. And they all cite E.P. Sanders because E.P. Sanders wrote a book in 1970 called Paul and Palestinian Judaism, where his main thesis is that the Jewish people didn't think they earned their salvation, and Paul wasn't attacking the idea that a person could earn their salvation. And so Protestant scholars have said, because the Jewish people didn't think they earned their salvation, they all knew that God had elected them into the covenant by grace, and they understood their works of the Mosaic law as just an obedience to God that maintained them and what they were already given by grace. Therefore, X, Y, and Z about works of law, etc. So, is that true? Did the Jewish people did they all know and believe and fully embrace the fact that their election into the covenant of salvation was by grace and not because of their own good works and merits? Interesting enough, E.P. Sanders says no. Well, yes and no. So E.P. Sanders' main argument is that the Jewish people didn't, on the whole, think that they were earning their salvation. However, I want to read a paragraph from E.P. Sanders that I think a lot of people haven't read, or at least they don't mention, or just don't care about. It's strange to me this never gets brought up. Page one, page 87 in his book, Paul and Palestinian Judaism. The title is called The Election and the Explanations of It. So we're talking about the election of the Jewish people by God into the covenant and the explanations of the election that the Jewish people had. So here's what he says on page 87. It is the second paragraph in this section. He says, the rabbis could not rest content with simply saying that God chose Israel, but inquired why he did so. They wished to explain that it was not odd of God to choose the Jews. There are basically three kinds of answers given by the rabbis to the question of why God chose Israel. So there's three different answers to this question. Why did God choose Israel to begin with? Why, on what basis did God elect them? That's what E.B. Sanders says. So it continues here. One answer is that God offered the covenant and the commandments attached to it to all, but only Israel accepted it. The second answer is that God chose Israel because of some merit found either in the patriarchs or in the Exodus generation, or on the condition of future obedience. The third reason is not really an answer at all. That is, it does not, in fact, give a reason beyond God's own will. It is that God chose Israel for his namesake. We may deal with each of these in turn. Okay, so that ends on page 88. Okay, so did you hear that? E.P. Sanders, in his book, says, page 87, there are three ways that the Jewish people understood the basis of their election into the covenant. And you always hear people say the Jewish people understood they were elected by grace into the covenant. They knew that they didn't merit or earn their way into the covenant, that God did that by grace. The Jewish people all knew that, and they all cite E.P. Sanders. Okay, E.P. Sanders does make that argument, but he also says this, that there were three ways in which they understood it. Of the three, one of them. So 33% of the opinion, basically, in some sense, was that they merited it. Because of their own good works and righteous deeds, they had merited and earned the election into the covenant. That's one of the three ways. Again, check it. E.P. Sanders, Paul and Palestinian Judaism, page 87, the election and the explanations of it. Please check me on this. Check me on this. Anyway, I'm getting excited. I love this topic. So scroll down to page 89. Here's some passages he gives for the examples of the Jewish people who understood election in terms of they had merited it. Here's one from Rabbi Eliezer HaKapar. I don't know how it's pronounced. Did not Israel possess 4 virtues, than which nothing in the whole world is more worthy? That they were above suspicion in regard to chastity and in regard to talebearing, that they did not change their names and they did not change their language. Okay, so here's E.P. Sanders is quoting this rabbi who was writing at the time of Paul as explaining the reason why they were elected, because they possessed 4 virtues that are more worthy than anything else. And he names these 4 virtues. 3 of them sound kind of weird, but one of them is like above suspicion in regard to chastity, right? He has more quotes here that he uses to show that this was one of the main 3 ways in which they understood the election. And then he just says, it will be seen immediately that this attitude is in direct conflict with the one we described earlier. So now he's saying, like, okay, I know I said earlier that they didn't think that they earned their way into the covenant, and I know this is in conflict with that. He says, and then he goes on, he says, we shall not now inquire whether or not these views can be reconciled, but shall proceed to other explanations of why Israel was chosen. So he goes on to the 3rd one, right? Or actually, and then he actually goes on to show more passages of where they talk about they merited it. I'm not going to go through all these. If you want to, the section, E.P. Sanders, Paul and Palestinian Judaism, begins on page 87. And so the question, did the Jewish people think that they earned their salvation in terms of their election into the covenant? You always hear people say this. You always hear people say that. People who love Pauline scholarship and who are really big on it, they always say, no, we know now. Since E.P. Sanders, we know that the Jewish people understood their election into the covenant was by grace. Is that true? 2/3, perhaps, understood that. 2/3 of the explanations. But of the only 3 ways that they understood it, according to E.P. Sanders, one of them was that they earned it. They merited their election to the covenant. So very important. Very important. But now let's go to the text of the Bible itself. Open your Bibles with me if you got one. Acting like I'm in church. Go to Romans 10, verse 5 through 8. I'm putting it into Google. This is perhaps my favorite passage in the whole Bible. You're also going to want to open up to Deuteronomy 9 and 30. Deuteronomy 9. I'm going to open up these as well. And Deuteronomy 30. Why? That's because in Romans 10, Paul's going to quote or allude to or reference these passages in Deuteronomy 9 and 30. So open those up. Okay. So the passage in Romans 10. Also go to Galatians 3:12 because that's important too here. So the passage we're looking at is Romans 10, verses 5 through 8. The other 3 passages you're going to want to have open as well in order to cross-reference is Galatians 3:12, Deuteronomy 9, and Deuteronomy 30. I think it's 9:4, and I forget what the verse is in Deuteronomy 30. So here's the passage in Romans. Chapter 10, verse 5 through 8. For Moses writes about the righteousness which is of the law. The man who does these things shall live by them. But the righteousness of faith says, do not say in your heart, who will ascend into heaven? That is, to bring Christ down. Or who will descend into the deep? That is, to bring Christ up from the dead. But what does it say? The word is near you, in your mouth and in your heart. That is the word of faith that we preach. Great passage. First, let me give you what it means, and then we'll go back and dissect and I'll show you why it means that. So here's what he says. Moses writes about the righteousness which is of the law. The man who does these things shall live by them. So if you want justification, if you want righteousness by the law, it's based on what you do. You have to have done the law. That means the whole thing. Every commandment of the law, you have to have done it. That means if you've sinned, you have not done a commandment. So anyone who sinned can't get righteousness by the law because you've sinned. You haven't done the law. You've broken the law because you've sinned. That's why Paul says in Romans 3, for all have fallen short, all have sinned, therefore it's by grace. That's why you can't have righteousness by the law or by works of the law or by works of any kind because you've sinned. And that's what he says in Romans 10:5. Moses writes about the righteousness which is of the law, the righteousness that comes from the law. The man who does these things shall live by them. If you want righteousness by the law, it's by what you do. Now, verse 6, but, contrasting with verse 5, but the righteousness of faith speaks in this way. Do not say in your heart, don't you dare think, who will ascend into heaven? That is, I need to resurrect. I need to get to God. I need to do these things through my strength. I need to achieve these things. That is to bring Christ down. No, 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 no. If you think that you've got to do all that, you're denying that Jesus already did it for you. It's not about what you do. It's about what Jesus did. Or who will descend into the abyss. You don't need to die and resurrect. You don't need to go under the underworld and grab those who are there to bring them up. You don't need to achieve these things. You don't need to do those things. That is to bring Christ up from the dead, as if he didn't already do it. If you say, I need to ascend, I need to descend, you know what? You just bring Christ down, take him down, bring him up, get rid of his work. It's about my work. It's as if he didn't already do those things. It's not about what you do. But what does it say? But what does the righteousness of faith say? The word is near you. It's in your mouth and in your heart. That is the word of faith we preach. It's not about you need to go do some great difficult thing to achieve this. It's not about what you do. It's already near you because of what he did, not because of what you do. You want the righteousness based on what you do? That's a righteousness based on the law. That's impossible. That's not based on faith. If it's based on faith, you have a prohibition from thinking it's about what you do, and it's only about what Christ did for you. That's what it means. So why does it mean that? Let's break it down. Okay, let's go to Galatians 3:12. Open up your Bibles to Galatians 3:12. 3:12. This is a really important verse for understanding this because in Galatians 3:12, Paul says, the law is not based on faith. The law is not based on faith. On the contrary, it says, the one who does these things shall live by them. Okay, same verse he just quoted in 10:5. He's quoting now in Galatians 3:12. Again, Romans and Galatians, in both, he's talking about this contrast between works of the law and justification by faith. And here in Galatians 3:12, he quotes the same verse in the same kind of discussion where he's contrasting works and faith. And he says, the law is not based on faith because it says the one who does these things shall live by them. Okay, so we go back to Romans 10:5 through 8. For Moses writes about the righteousness which is of the law, the man who does these things shall live by them. So if anyone tells you that Paul is not here contrasting verse 5, which is the righteousness of the law, which is the one who does these things shall live by them, with verse 6, which is the righteousness of faith, point them back to Galatians 3:12 for me, please. And ask them to read that out loud one time, because Paul is specifically saying that is not based on faith. This verse right here, the one who does these things shall live by them, which represents the righteousness of the law in Romans 10:5, is not based on faith, according to Galatians 3:12. The law is not based on faith. On the contrary, it says the person who does these things will live by them. Okay, I feel like I need to repeat that 10 more times to drive that into you, because I know some of you aren't getting it yet. Anyway, but the righteousness of faith speaks. So contrast, we have this contrast. First, there's this righteousness which is of the law, which is based on what you do. But there's a contrast with that, with the righteousness of faith, which says, do not say in your heart. Let's pause. Let's go to Deuteronomy 9:4. Open that up for me, please. 9:4. After the Lord your God has driven them out before you, do not say in your heart, the Lord has brought me here to take possession of this land because of my righteousness. Okay, so if you go to any commentary on Romans by any scholar, they're all going to say that in Romans 10, verse 6, that when Paul says, do not say in your heart, that he's referencing this passage in Deuteronomy 9:4. Now, you might think it's very tenuous, but all the scholars say this, and it makes a lot of sense when you see what Paul's actually saying here. And please go check your commentaries. You'll see that they all say this. So in Deuteronomy 9, we just read it, verse 4, the Lord says, do not say in your heart that the Lord has brought me here to this land because of my righteousness. So in context, the Lord is bringing the people to the promised land, and he's rebuking them, and he's reminding them, don't you think that I've chosen you and given you this land because of your righteousness, because you deserve this, because you're better than the other nations. No, you're an unrighteous people. In fact, let me read the whole thing for you. Romans 10, starting verse 4. After the Lord your God has driven them out before you, do not say in your heart, the Lord has brought me here to take possession of this land because of my righteousness. No, it is on account of the wickedness of the nations that the Lord is going to drive them out before you. It is not because of your righteousness or your integrity that you are going to take possession of the land, but on account of the wickedness of these nations. The Lord, your God, is going to give it to you. And then go to verse 7. Remember this, and never forget how you aroused the anger of the Lord your God in the wilderness, from the day you left Egypt until you arrived there. You have been rebellious against the Lord. And he keeps going. He keeps telling them how, you committed idolatry. You are a stiff-necked people. I wanted to destroy you. And the Lord just keeps going and going and going, describing all the sins and idolatry of the Israelite people. And at the end, he just reminds them, so don't think I'm giving you this land because of your righteousness, because you're an unrighteous people. Right? That's what the Lord's saying here in Deuteronomy 9. So go back to Romans chapter 10. So we've just heard Moses writes about the righteousness which is of the law. The man who does these things shall live by them. And that's being contrasted because that's not based on faith. CF Galatians 3:12. That's based on what you do. And you can't be justified by what you do because you haven't done the law. You've sinned. You've broken it, right? That's what Romans 3 says. But in contrast with that kind of righteousness based on what you do, we have the righteousness of faith, which says, do not say in your heart as if the Lord is going to bless you or save you or give you the promised land because of your righteousness. No. You're an unrighteous person, says God in Deuteronomy 9:4 and what follows, which Paul is citing here in Romans 10, verse 6. So then Paul goes on, and where he says, who will ascend into heaven, that is to bring Christ down, or who will ascend to the abyss, that is to bring Christ up from the dead. Here he is quoting Deuteronomy 30. Again, check your commentaries. Everyone's going to tell you he's quoting these, but when I open it up and read it, you'll see that that's what he's quoting. Let me go down. Is it Deuteronomy 30? Yeah, it starts in verse 11. Now, what I am commanding you today is not too difficult for you or beyond your reach. It is not up in heaven so that you have to ask, who will ascend into heaven to get it and proclaim it so that we may have to obey it? Nor is it beyond the sea that you may ask, who will cross the sea to get it and proclaim it so that we may obey it? No, the word is very near you. It is in your mouth and in your heart so that you may obey it. So very clearly, Paul is referencing, who will go into heaven? Who will cross the sea? No, it's near you. It's in your heart. It's in your mouth, right? That's what both passages say. Paul changes it up a little bit. But what's going on here in Deuteronomy 30, verse 11 through 14? What is God saying? Because this is important for understanding Romans 10. He's saying, what I'm telling you is not difficult. You don't have to ascend into heaven. You don't have to ask who's going to go into heaven to find out God's will. You don't have to go cross a sea. There's not these amazing, difficult achievements that you have to go do. No, I've come down. I've descended. I've done the work of revealing myself to you. Here it is. It's in your mouth and in your heart. Right? That's what God's telling the Israelite people. I've revealed myself. I'm giving you my law. I did the work. I came to you. You don't have to do some great achievement. You don't have to achieve some difficult task. You don't have to ascend into heaven or go cross the sea to go find my will. No, I did it. I came to you. I gave you. Here it is. This is easy. Just do it. Right? That's what God's saying in Deuteronomy 30. So, how does Paul make that applicable to us and the righteousness of faith? Right? So let's go back the whole passage. Moses writes about the righteousness which is of the law. The man who does these things shall live by them. That's a righteousness based on what you do. That's not based on faith. But the righteousness of faith says, don't say in your heart, it's not because of your righteousness that I'm doing this. Who will ascend into heaven? That is to bring Christ down. Or who will descend into the deep? That is to bring Christ up from the dead. But what does it say? The word is near you. It's in your mouth and in your heart. That is the word of faith that we preach. So, what was the message that God was saying? You don't have to go do some great thing. I've come to you. I've given you myself. It's already here. It's easy. So while Paul is contrasting this righteousness, which is based on what you do, which is so difficult that it's impossible because none of us can do everything we'd have to do. We've all sinned. With the righteousness of faith, which is saying, hey, don't think that this is because you've been righteous, because you did X, Y, and Z. No, you're unrighteous. You don't have to think you need to ascend into heaven. That is as if Christ didn't already do this for you. That is to bring Christ down. Or who will descend into the abyss? That is to bring Christ up from the dead. Don't look to some difficult task that you have to do, because that's denying that Christ did that. If you think you have to ascend into heaven, that just bring Christ right on down. Who will descend into the abyss? That's just bring Christ up. Why is he down there? We're going to go down there. Bring him up. Who's going to go in heaven? No, bring Christ down. We're going up there. Bring him down. We don't need what he did because we're going to do it, right? So there's contrast. Don't think it's about what you do. It's about what God did. You don't have to do these things. God did it. Here it is. It's easy. It's right here. Just believe in your mouth, in your heart. You want the righteousness of the law? That's based on what you do. That's impossible. You can't do it. Why? Because you've sinned. You've sinned. And if you want the righteousness based on the law, that's not based on faith. That's based on the one who does these things shall live by them. And that's a contrast with the righteousness of faith, right? That's not based on faith. What's based on faith says, don't think it's because of your righteousness. No. If you think you've got to go do this stuff, that's just basically to deny that Jesus already did it for you. Jesus did it for you. God did it. Right here it is. It's right here in your mouth, in your heart, the word of faith that we preach, that if you confess with your mouth Jesus is the Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. So we go back now to the beginning of this video. Did the Jewish people think that they earned their salvation, that they earned their membership in the covenant? We saw that E.P. Sanders actually said, well, of the three explanations that the Jewish people had, one of them was actually they did think that they earned their election into the covenant. Now, because there it is, that's at least a possibility now based on what E.P. Sanders said. How do we interpret, how do we understand what Paul's doing in this passage? Well, Paul harkens back to a passage where God told the Israelite people, don't think you earned it. Don't think it's because of your righteousness, because it's not. Now, what scholars will sometimes say is like, yeah, those passages are in their Old Testament. Obviously, the Jewish people knew that, right? So one of the things they'll say is, Paul can't here in Romans 10:5-8 be saying what you just said he was saying, Taylor, because his audience already knew all of this, and it would be stupid for him to tell the Jewish people what they already knew. And this argument really is just an absolutely terrible argument. It's sort of like this. I come from, 2,000 years in the future. I come to our American culture, I don't have any idea of the practices of American people or anything like that. I just have some texts that were written by people that are alive today. And I have a lot of texts throughout all of church history, and I have the Bible texts, which all speak very strongly condemning sexual immorality, right? And I have some texts written by pastors that are alive today that condemn sexual immorality. And you know what I'm going to say? I'm going to say, these can't really be condemning sexual immorality because all Christians already know this. You examine all their texts, and they all condemn sexual immorality. You won't find any Christians anywhere saying that sexual immorality is okay. So it doesn't make any sense for someone in 2023 to be writing a text condemning sexual immorality. It can't mean that. You can't interpret it that way because they already know it's bad. Yeah, you can tell someone that a sin is wrong, that self-righteousness is wrong, sexual immorality is wrong. That doesn't mean they fully embrace it and believe it and act like it. And that's why God, throughout the whole entire Old Testament, even though he had told the Jews previously, this is by my grace and love and mercy and my election, had to tell them again, hey, you're forgetting something. This is because I chose you, not because you were good and deserved it. And this isn't exclusive to the Jewish people. This is all human beings throughout all time. We all want to look to ourselves. We want to be the person who did it. I want to be the one who achieved it. I want the credit. That's just human nature. So if the Jewish people were good, holy, humble, pious, devout people, would they have had this message preached to them in their word? Yeah. Um, would they have understood it, believed it, became as humble and trusting in God and rejecting self as much as humanly possible? Yeah. But that doesn't mean that the Jewish people on the whole practiced that, just like the fact that Christians have a long history of condemning sexual immorality doesn't mean that the church today is free of sexual immorality. Can I get an amen? uh, so, did the Jewish people think that they earned their election? E.P. Sanders says of the three ways they understood it, one of them was they earned their election. Paul